Well, hello. I'd like to welcome everyone today to this joint British-Kazakh Society UK Department of International Trade event on mining in Kazakhstan and the external factors which are affecting it. As I say, this is a joint event, and I'd like to introduce Ros Lund from the DIT, who will just make a few words comment as well.
Hello, everybody. The DIT are very pleased to be supporting this webinar with the British-Kazakh Society. We've been focusing on mining in Kazakhstan for about 7 years, and we're very happy that the British-Kazakh Society has decided to focus on mining at last, and I wish you all a good webinar.
Thank you very much, Ros. That's most appreciated. Now to look at the setting that we're dealing with, which is rather unusual with these external factors, we're very pleased to welcome Ben Godwin from PRISM, who will paint the setting for the rest of the discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. Do let me know if you can't hear me or you can't see the presentation, but I will continue. As David said, we're in very strange times at the moment, where 89 days, or Kazakhstan is 89 days into its COVID-19 outbreak. The first cases actually came from Europe rather than China. And at the moment we have over 13,000 cases recorded within Kazakhstan and nearly 60 deaths. As you can see from the diagram, the case rate in Kazakhstan has been falling. That's the orange line on the diagram, which is positive news. And overall, I think we can say that the healthcare response and the lockdown has been relatively effective. There have been certainly isolated cases of failure within the system. So we've seen hospitals shutting down due to outbreaks within hospitals and things like that. But overall, it seems that the government has kept the outbreak largely under control. Now, there are some questions around the government's figures itself, the way it's recording these figures and the amount of testing that the government is doing. I would say largely that if you're looking at the numbers, use them more as a guide rather than a specific exact figure. On the whole, I think certainly within Kazakhstan, the government is being perceived as handling the crisis well. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev certainly led from the front in laying out both anti-crisis healthcare measures and economic measures, and a large amount of work has been done to provide some social protection measures to the population. So that's been a sort of positive development. And two things I'd highlight in that is that the government communications operation has been very effective. There have certainly been some issues with it, but overall, compared to previous crises, the government has acted swiftly and communicated its message rather well. And secondly, the use of digital tools to identify vulnerable people within the population and to allow people to apply for government benefits is a really positive sign that the civil service is becoming a little less bureaucratic and a bit more mobile. So that's certainly positive. Some large industrial operations have been impacted by the crisis. We've heard about oil and gas fields in western Kazakhstan, an oil refinery in southern Kazakhstan, and one mining site belonging to Kazakhmys, which is in the Karaganda region, the nur-sultan field. I would say that some of these numbers are slightly inflated just because the testing on those industrial sites have been very good, but we have seen some interruptions to operations. If you have operations out in Kazakhstan at the moment, or are thinking of traveling yourself, bear in mind the travel situation at the moment. Visa-free entry, which many of us have benefited from over the last few years, has been halted until the 1st of November, and transit visas also. So if you are looking, do check your visa status before you go. And when you arrive, unless you're a diplomat or on an official delegation, you're likely to go into a 2-day quarantine where you'll receive a PCR test. Now, you can produce your own test certificate, and that might allow you to go through without quarantining, but again, do check in advance. There are some international flights that are happening. Those are largely serving the the oil and gas fields in Western Kazakhstan, and we anticipate some more international flights at the end of the month or perhaps in July. International cargo trade has continued to run throughout the crisis, although Kazakhstan, of course, being a landlocked country, has faced considerable disruptions in terms of supply chains and things like that. So that things are definitely running, but be prepared for delays on that front. The state of emergency was lifted at the beginning of May, but across Kazakhstan there are different levels of lockdown. So again, if you have operations or you're thinking about traveling to certain regions, do be careful as to what the lockdown situation is. Maybe check in advance, drop me an email, get in touch with the embassy, and see what the latest is. So finally, just looking at the economic impact, of course, Kazakhstan has been hit by the global slowdown. We've seen both a demand and a supply shock, but it's really the volatility of the oil price that's hurt Kazakhstan the most. We've seen a 15% collapse in the tenge, although the tenge, the local currency, has recovered quite well with the recovery of the oil price. And the government is anticipating a 20% drop in budget revenues this year. I think we can anticipate that to be slightly higher, but that depends also very much on the oil price and the ability of the OPEC Plus agreement to stay in place. The government is also spending nearly $13.5 billion on a support package. A lot of that is tie-over loans for businesses, particularly small and medium enterprises. But I would anticipate some large bailouts to take place as well, possibly within the banking sector. We have seen a bit of fragility there. On the socio-economic front, we've seen more than 8 million applications for government benefits. 4.5 have been considered eligible. So that's 4.5 million people, which is nearly half of the workforce in Kazakhstan has applied for some sort of government benefit. So certainly the crisis has hit the economy hard and certainly hit incomes hard. So that's one area to be very concerned about. Very quickly, the outlook, I'd say we've seen in the last few weeks a bit of stabilization with the oil price and also with lockdown measures returning, people are getting back to work and the economy is starting to run again. But Kazakhstan entered this particular crisis off the back of a longer economic malaise, which has seen sort of the state take a larger role within the economy, socio-economic conditions get worse, inflation rise, and so certainly there are some structural issues for Kazakhstan to consider as it leaves the crisis. So I'll hand you back to David and you can get on to the mining section. Now, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ben. That was an excellent overview to kick the event off here. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mike Beare, who has a very distinguished and long career involved in the mining business, 25 years plus, has been involved in Kazakhstan for 15 years plus. And is based in Almaty with SRK managing their Central Asia new business. Please. Mike.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. I would just like to introduce to you our first speaker, who is from Tainton, Samruk, and he is the head of investment, and his name is Nariman Absametov. And if you'd like to take it away, Nariman, he's got a presentation for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, David, for first of all to be the part of this panel discussion. And I will be talking about the two main things. First of all, it's the overview of the Kazakhstani investments and how what is going on in this sector. From the perspective of the investment climate and the actions was done for the last couple of years from the government of Kazakhstan. And the second issue, I will talk about the heat of this COVID situation and the crisis for the mining and the metallurgical sector of the Kazakhstan. So first of all, let me start from this brief overview of the investment climate in Kazakhstan for the mining sector. So as you know, the Kazakhstan is a part of the PRISM family from 2018. So we had the new mining code started from 2018, and that it's fully correspond with the West world practices of Western Australia. And after 2 years of working of this mining code, we can see even now the results, and we can say that this reform was successful. During these 2 years, more than 650 licenses were issued. So if you compare the period from the early 19th till 2018, only 500 licenses were issued during that period. And we can see that for the last 2 years, when the new code was applied, over 650 licenses were issued. So the growth rate is incredible. And we expect that this growth should continue, but the COVID hits the plans of the investors as well. So it's not about the restrictions even for coming, but we see that in the world, in general, companies are trying to decrease the level of investments, and especially for the high risk things such as geological research. At the same time, we see the key big players to Kazakhstani field. Even this year, Australian giant Fortescue Mining Group announced that they start joint work with the Tainton Samruk for geological exploration in Kazakhstan. So jointly together, we received 47 licenses with the overall territory of more than 700 square kilometers. And it is a good signal for other majors to come to the country, and the new legislation is working. And let me continue about some brief information that about the COVID and what impact this crisis have for the mining and metallurgy sector of Kazakhstan. As it was mentioned above, so it hit Kazakhstan much, and it hit the two most influential from the taxes point of view industries. It's oil and gas. So in early April, Chevron announced that COVID was found in the biggest oil deposit of Kazakhstan, Kashagan. Fortunately, they do not stop operations, but they have to reduce the investment program. If we are talking about the mining is the second biggest industry in Kazakhstan. So it took about 7.3% in GDP, and have about 20% of general export of Kazakhstan. With for the last years, starting from 2015 to 2019, the average growth of the industry was about 4%. But for now, after announcing the first quarter's results, we can see that this year we are not expecting this industry to grow. It hit almost all the majors in the industry. So first of all, it's a price decline. So as you know, all the prices for the major metals declined from 10 to 25%, and the most significant decrease was in aluminium. Hopefully copper now recovering, and it's a good news for Kazakhstan as a big copper producer. Especially with the COVID, for example, Kazakhmys, the nur-sultan mine, it's one of the biggest mine of Kazakhmys, was closed to quarantine from 22nd of May and was not working for more than the week. More than 300 workers of nur-sultan was infected by COVID, and they have to stop their operations. The second company that was hit a lot is, of course, ERG. It's first of all, it's from the decline of prices for aluminium. They have to stop the Torga bauxite mine for 3 months, and from April, and they are planning to start the operations from July, but no announcement was updated for that. About the other key copper player is Kaz Minerals. Kaz Minerals expenditure and capex program was reduced for October 2 in 2020. And the last I would like to mention about the Kazatomprom, the leader of uranium, uranium producing leader of the world. So they announced that they will reduce production because of the crisis caused by COVID for 400 tons of uranium. If we'll take it's more than 20%. But the tricky thing about the Kazatomprom, as they have the huge impact on the market, even the announcement of 20% of decrease of production do not affect their statements, and they still have hitting this income, and they have the good announcement for the first quarter because of the increase of uranium prices for 30% after the announcement. The other thing I would like to say that there are also some additional costs caused by COVID for all the mining companies. They have to increase the expenditure for security of the employees. They have to buy additional equipment and other things. And approximately, as has been announced for the major 27 producers of metals and mining of Kazakhstan, the cost is about 27 million USD for the first 3 months of the crisis. But anyway, in Tauken Samruk, we are staying optimistic. So we're expecting that the price recovery will start from, will already started. We see it in the copper business. We also see that the Kazakhstani government are trying to support all the mining companies. They're planning to, first of all, to decrease mineral extraction tax for companies that are suffering. They're increasing the VAT refund. Also, it's been discussing that geological exploration works will be excluded from paying of VAT for starting from this year, and it will be some vacations from recultivation, the contract obligation spending for geological contracts from this year. And we hope that this package is already discussing in the parliament, and we are hoping that it will be approved in following 2 months. So in general, that is all from my side. So I'll be very glad to answer all these questions and the other issues concerning the situation of COVID in Kazakhstan. And Mike, I return the mic for you.
Thank you very much, Nariman. Yeah, that was certainly a very interesting perspective. You actually managed to answer quite a few of my questions before I've had a chance to ask them, so I'll have to think of 1 or 2 more. Our next speaker is Nigel Robinson, and he is the CEO of Central Asia Metals. And you might know they've been operating the KOUNRAD operations and have acquired another operation in Eastern Europe recently. So I will leave it to Nigel to fill us in on the details. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike, and good afternoon to everybody out there, and I hope you're all safe and well. I have prepared a couple of slides, a few slides just to talk to, so I'll just get those up and just let me know that you can see those before we start. There, hopefully you can all see the slides. As Mike said, Nigel Robinson, CEO of Central Asia Metals PLC. We listed back in 2010 on the alternative investment market on the London Stock Exchange with the intention of developing a project in Kazakhstan. We've been operating in Kazakhstan now since that period, and prior to that period, actually 2007, when we won the tender on a joint venture basis to develop the KOUNRAD leaching dumps basically at just north of Balkhash. You can see on the map there where we operate, just about 20 kilometers north of the Balkhash Lake and equidistant between Almaty and Astana, and or nur-sultan should I say. And the plant that we developed there is a in-situ dump leach SXEW processing facility. We've been in production now for 8 years, started producing end of April 2012. And since that time, we've now produced over 100,000 tons of pure cathode copper at very low costs. Fully invested in the project, got a range of between 12.5 to 14,000 tons of copper. This year's guidance is 12.5 to 13,500 tons of copper, and we're one of the lowest cost producers of copper in the world, with a life of operation out to 2034. That's when a license expires at COUNRAD. And 2019 production was just over that guidance, 13,771 tons of copper. And as Mike rightly pointed out, but I won't talk about it in this particular session, we now own the Sasa mine in northern Macedonia, the Balkans region, which is a more traditional mine, an underground zinc and lead mine, producing zinc and lead in concentrate, with a life of mine out to 2038. So what is COUNRAD? Effectively, what we do at COUNRAD is we produce copper from what are waste dumps. The dumps, not the best picture, I'll show you a better picture in a minute. There's an open pit there, which is about 500 meters deep, 1.5 kilometers north to south and about 1.5 kilometers east to west. So a huge hole in the ground that was mined from about 1936 from the government, and then was handed over to Kazakh MIS, who mined it and stopped operating there around about 2006, 2007. And sporadically they operate there, but not on a commercial basis effectively. And we won in 2007 the tender to process those dumps that you can just see, these striation marks here, which are pretty high. In the west they're about 40 meters high, and in the east they're about 20 meters high. And I'll go on to the technology in a minute as to what we do. But we basically produce copper from there. They are waste dumps. We've been producing it there now, as I say, for 8 years, where we've produced over 100,000 tons, generating a gross revenue of just over $600 million in that time, paying taxes back to government of about $143 million, and supporting a workforce of just over 300 people and 86 contractors. And I'll come on to it more later in this talk. But we do contribute a lot of money back to the local community in terms of voluntary donations to help the community. Bit of an aerial view, just what I've been talking about there. You can see the open pit, and you can see our plant out to the right of the chart there, an SXEW plant, initially 10,000 ton capacity, subsequently invested in that to bring it up to a nominal 15,000 ton per annum capacity. And what we effectively do is we put small irrigation dripper pipes onto the dumps, and we irrigate it with highly diluted sulfuric acid, which picks up copper as it goes through the dumps, and we put it into collector trenches, feed it back through pumps or gravity back to the plant, which is a traditional plant. Solvent extraction, electrowinning is what SXEW stands for, and from that process through electrolysis we produce pure cathode copper. Initially, we started in the east there on dumps, as you can see, 9 to 10, 5, 7, 6. And during 2014 and 15, we built a 12-kilometer pipeline, 2 of them, in fact, out to the west, so we can leach on the western dumps and ship the solution backwards and forwards to process it through the SXEW plant. We've got about 160,000 tons of recoverable copper left. And as I say, the license runs out to 2034. A little bit on the performance. It is seasonal. It gets very cold in the winter, down to minus 30, minus 35 possibly with wind chill, and up to plus 30, plus 35 in the summer. And we do produce copper throughout the year, produce more in Q2 and Q3, but you can see the chart there at the top, which shows, you know, a greater production in Q2 and Q3, the small spikes there. But we even out, and we do produce copper throughout the year, 365 days a year, 24 hours every day. So it's an in-situ dump leach. You can see the guidance figures there for production, and you can see just a few factors on the metallurgical leaching process. So in the eastern dumps, about an 8-month average time to recover up to 50% of the copper within those dumps, whereas in the western dumps, where we're now operating and recovering about 75% of our production, the leach time is a lot longer, about 20 months to get the copper out, and we only plan on recovering 35 to 42% of that copper within those dumps. And this chart you'll see down here is just a standard leach curve as to how long it takes to get that percentage recovery of the copper from those dumps. And that's all planned into the actual mine planning. Very low cost, as I said before. We operate well into the lowest quartile, which is where you want to be in times of crisis like we're currently going through with the pandemic. We produced copper, and last year's reported costs were 52 cents per pound. That's about $1,100 per ton. And today copper's selling at around about $5,600 to $5,700 per ton. Slightly subdued because of the impact on the world economy, obviously, but it shows that our project is cash generative even in these trying times, because we operate in that lowest quartile, which is what we like to do. A bit of a breakdown as to how those costs are made up, and you can see the level of the EBITDA margin. That's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. Given the fact that we don't move any of that ore and we simply leach it in situ, collect the solution and process it through the SXEW plant. I guess one of the key things about the focus of this afternoon's conversation and discussion here is about the impact that COVID-19 has had on us. Well, as we announced full year results for 2019 at the beginning of April, we were entering what we felt was a really risky period for us, given the impact of COVID-19 on world economies and the world going slowly but surely into a lockdown around all parts of the globe, including the two countries in which we operate, Kazakhstan and North Macedonia. So one of the things that's affected us is we have got a good track record of paying dividends. We've paid over the years since we started producing copper at Kazakhstan, $176 million back to shareholders. And this was the first time, a difficult decision for the board to decide that we would not pay a final dividend, despite some very good numbers for our 2019 production and financial numbers. So that's how it's affected us in that sense. And the main reason for that decision was the concern we had of going into Q2 and beyond, possibly, with maybe having to shut down the operations either in Kazakhstan or Macedonia. And I have to say, fortunately, due to some very good management by the team on site, by close liaison with the governments in country, and by changing our procedures on site in terms of hygiene and social distancing and the way we ship people in and out of the plants, we've managed to maintain production throughout that period. We've currently got no employees diagnosed or contractors diagnosed with the illness, fortunately, nor are there any cases within the town of Balkhash, although there is an increasing number of cases, as you heard from previous speakers, in Karaganda. So, you know, I liked one of Nariman's slides, which says this is a crisis in progress. Well, it is a crisis in progress. So far, we're doing okay, but we're very reluctant to take our foot off the pedal, and we remain vigilant because of these increasing cases. I think as governments ease restrictions throughout the world, you are finding a slight increase. So we have to be cautious and careful and remain ever vigilant to make sure that we can maintain our production and deliveries. We haven't had any disruption to those deliveries. Again, we've worked closely with our off-taker, and we've also worked with the local government authorities to make sure that we could continue to ship copper both from the plant and across the borders to the end consumers. So no significant impact in that sense. So no impact on the employees, no impact on deliveries or production. But where we have worked closely, in both countries really, is working with the local communities in terms of providing some kind of support to them. And one of the key things we did in Kazakhstan was to work with the local hospital in Balkhash, and we've bought for them what's known as a PCR test machine, which is effectively a machine to be able to test people for COVID-19. We've placed the order for that machine. It'll be delivered in about 2 months' time from Germany, and there's about another 19 machines. And the nearest one to us at the moment is in Karaganda, which is about 400 kilometers away. So I think it'll help both the Balkhash and the local surrounding community. And it's something that we decided was money well spent to invest into to help them. Obviously, we've done all the normal things you'd expect on site in terms of changes in shift pattern, change to the canteen, transport arrangements, and monitoring, you know, the education of staff such that they improve the hygiene on site, and identifying anybody who potentially is a vulnerable member of our staff, so we protect them from COVID-19 as best we can, and reinforcing all the government guidance and increased hygiene measures on site. Working with communities is something we've been doing since we started production actually at KOUNRAD some 8 years ago. And we have a commitment to putting 0.25% of the revenue from KOUNRAD back into the community. We spent $300,000 there last year. We may well spend slightly more than that this year because, as I say, we've already spent close to $100,000 on assisting the community on COVID-19 related issues. And that will not stop us investing in the other aspects of community support that we like to invest in. Generally airing that support towards longer term projects, like one example here is the Kind Heart Centre in the town of Balkhash, which helps disabled children. We've doubled the capacity of that school and helped them to build up the facilities and the infrastructure for helping local children, which is something we're particularly proud of. And I think on that point, really, that's all I have to say on the impact of COVID-19 on our operations in Kazakhstan. We are going through difficult times. We do remain vigilant, as I say, but so far, thanks to the hard work of the people in Kazakhstan and working with the community and the local governments, we've managed to maintain production and deliveries and maintain the well-being of all the staff on site. And on that point, I'll be open to any questions later, but I'll hand back to Mike now at this stage to continue with the discussions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nigel. It's very interesting to hear about what you've been up to, particularly those the social aspects that you've been focusing on so strongly in Balkhash. I'm sure the local people appreciate that very much. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's Ken Tainton, who is the Exploration Director of Rio Tinto for Africa and Eurasia. So, Ken, please take it away, and the floor's yours.
Thank you very much, Mike, and good evening, good afternoon to everybody on the call. Firstly, thanks very much, Nigel. Really good to hear the fantastic work that Central Asia Metals has been able to do to keep your operations going through this very challenging period. Within Rio Tinto, we're at a somewhat different part of the value chain, being very much in the exploration space within Kazakhstan, where we have now been active for near on 15 years. We were first attracted to Kazakhstan primarily by the very positive geological setting, believing that there are undoubtedly many more discoveries to be made in the country to add to the number of high-class operations that are already active, so that we can sustain and even grow future production in Kazakhstan into the long term. And during that period of 15 years, we've been involved in several exploration joint ventures with other resource companies, both local and international, as well as with government through their state exploration arm, KAZ Geology. Now, Rio Tinto's objective worldwide is to build successful long-term businesses wherever we operate. And our ultimate goal is to create shareholder value and, in turn, value for society. And this has been very clearly demonstrated in recent months through Rio Tinto's response to the global turmoil caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been informed by alignment of all of our actions to a very clearly set out set of global principles. The first one is that we do everything we can to protect the health and well-being of our employees, our contractors, and the communities around our operations. Secondly, we need to protect and operate our assets to the best of our ability. And then thirdly, we need to build resilience so that we can support a rapid return of all of our operations to full production. Aligned with these, we took some early and far-reaching steps to isolate our operations, particularly from vulnerable communities around us, and to prevent any risk that we could inadvertently introduce infection into those communities. And this has required some major changes to work patterns and protocols and controls around the world. We've collaborated closely with host governments and with partners and moved swiftly to install rigorous screening and testing programs at all of our operations. And this has allowed us to continue to employ our staff, to service our customers, and to pay taxes. And in recognition of the major economic impact of the pandemic, Rio Tinto has nearly doubled its global community spend, allocating an additional $25 million to support COVID-19 response and resilience programs around the world, focused on those communities close to our operations, but also including our global exploration projects and including Kazakhstan. So in Kazakhstan at the moment, our exploration activities are seasonal. And perhaps fortuitously, the COVID-19 pandemic struck just as we were completing our winter drill programs. Our initial priority was to safely return all of our staff and contractors to their homes, which was successfully achieved. And as with Central Asia Metals, we have had no cases of COVID-19 affecting any of our employees or our contractors. We have managed to maintain all of those staff on full staff throughout this period. Now, under normal circumstances, we would have resumed our operational activities in the last few weeks. This has not been possible, but we remain committed to our 2020 program and continue to develop detailed plans to resume projects once regulations permit, ensuring that we put in place robust protocols to protect the health of our teams, but equally importantly, that of our surrounding communities. While the COVID-19 pandemic dominates the current discourse, in line with our resilience principle, we're also trying to look beyond the immediate impact of COVID. This pandemic has demonstrated once again that only successful and profitable businesses can provide benefits to their shareholders, to the communities, and to the governments on a sustainable basis. So if we examine what it takes to stay successful as a mining business, this is going to include elements such as a supportive and stable regulatory regime, effective political institutions, and investment in infrastructure, education, and training. We've seen firsthand how our ability to do business in Kazakhstan has evolved for the better during our time in the country. And some of the more recent developments have been in the legislative framework governing exploration and mining. In the past 3 years, we've seen the evolution of several key pieces of legislation that we now see as being much more aligned with widely accepted international standards and best practices. Nariman has already referred to the new mining code that was introduced in December 2017, with inputs from the OECD and modelled on the West Australian Code. And this now permits direct application for new licenses with internationally competitive terms, relinquishment obligations, and expenditure commitments. The areas of Kazakhstan that are available for open application continue to be increased, and greater access to ground is supported by improved access to historical information and technical reports prior to applying for a license over an area. And there is work underway to develop a platform to serve this digital data online in the coming years. Secondly, the new draft ecological code has been developed with OECD guidance and with leading international practices in mind, and this should be enacted during the current year. This looks to place much more accountability on companies for their environmental performance, as well as placing more emphasis on investment into new technologies to manage and reduce emissions and waste. And finally, the tax code changes that were introduced in 2018 have seen the abolition of the commercial discovery bonus and excess profits tax, and the introduction of tax incentives that have fundamentally changed project development economics, so raising the prospects for development of what would previously be seen as marginal projects. The sum of all these changes represents a fundamental change to the exploration landscape in our view. It's aligned with the stated ambition of government to make Kazakhstan one of the 30 top global economies by 2050. But obviously with so many changes being implemented in a short space of time, let alone with the difficulties imposed by the current breakdown of normal work practices, the systems and processes required to execute these is going to take time to mature. We also need to navigate the very complex transition from old code subsoil users, who in many cases now face a paradigm shift as they adapt project scopes developed to be in alignment with existing old legislative obligations to comply with new regulations. But fortunately, our experience has been that the ministries, the relevant ministries at the MIID and the MENGR have been willing to listen to the perspective of explorers and have welcomed feedback on their new initiatives through direct engagement, town halls, and through industry associations. The challenge we face as business is to embrace these changes to support the sustainability of our industry. We need to engage openly and effectively both with government and with the local communities that host our presence. We need to communicate and deliver the positive economic impacts that include job creation and employment, royalties, and shared infrastructure, to name but a few. And this clearly is even more critical in the current challenging financial circumstances. So in conclusion, we believe Kazakhstan has the right geological pedigree, continues to develop the mechanisms and framework that should attract more investors into the sector. The proof is going to be in the pudding when we see the sustained implementation of the new code initiatives. But it's definitely clear from what we've seen so far that the administration is keen to work for mutual benefit. It is going to take a lot of hard work, but we're looking forward to being part of this future and to build a robust mining economy in Kazakhstan post-COVID-19. Thank you very much.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for that, Ken. That's a very interesting and detailed overview of the way that you see the developments in the industry over recent years. That certainly I've been witness to quite a few of those changes also, but from a slightly different perspective to yours. So I think we've had a very interesting exchange of sort of views there about the status of the industry, where we've heard from Tainton and Samruk. We've heard from the operational side of it from Nigel with his experience with Central Asia Metals and their production perspectives. And then finally with Ken, with the perspective of a very large international mining company who's been actively exploring here for a long period of time, and has got a very detailed sort of assessment on where the government's been going with that. So I'd just like to now focus on a few questions, and I'll just sort of like step around our speakers and ask them a few questions about some of the things that they've been talking about. I'll start with Nariman. I've got a couple of questions for you about particularly this the investment climate. You mentioned about some of these companies coming in, for example, Fortescue Metals, that have chosen to spend quite a large part of their exploration budget in looking in Kazakhstan, which is a very exciting development to get more larger investors here. But I just wondered if, I mean, one of the critical things that they're considering at the moment, as many of our clients are, is what's going to happen in the rest of the year. There's a huge amount of uncertainty, and I appreciate that that's very unprecedented, and none of us really know what's going to happen. But I can certainly see that there's companies like Fortescue, and probably Ken as a similar perspective, that they're thinking now, are we going to be able to do anything in this summer exploration season? Are we going to be able to bring people in, for example? And I've got staff of mine who are sitting in the UK and Canada, and we've got clients who are depending on them, and Kazakh staff who are depending on those expatriates returning for training and support. And they're currently sitting there in Toronto and London, and the Kazakhstan embassies are not open to even speak to them about getting a visa and about when things are likely to open up. I mean, is that something that you have any perspective on, being a JV partner for some foreign entities in that regard?
Mike, thank you for the question. I think it's everyone is concerned about it and worried about it. I would like to divide this question for 2 parts. First of all, we can see for acting companies that they actually work, for example, in extraction, they already have some operations. It's already the issue been solved with the ministry, and the ministry helped to receive the permissions for the people who are involved in production to come to Kazakhstan. Now I'm talking about mainly it's the gold producers, like a polymetal, for example, for the Russian workers and other one. And we see that the Ministry of Industries, they are trying to make the full support for producers, and they are ready to communicate and to give the special corridors for the workers who are involved in the production. The same thing is done in the oil and gas sector, as you know, that the foreigners are coming, and in Kashagan and Karachaganak, we see not only the workers of these operating companies, but also the service companies are allowed to come to the country. I think the same thing will be with the mining sector if they will ask. So the huge work is being done on that side. The second issue is about the geological search. So we already applied, and the ministry are ready to allow these people to enter the country. But the case with the Fortescue, the Australia is not allowing their people to leave the Australia. So we have the reverse thing, that we are ready to people, these people to come. And there is an express test. So anyway, you have to be for 2 days. You have to be isolated until you receive this express test results. But anyway, we could say that we could solve this issue if we have some list of people at least 1 month in advance. But for now, we don't see that is like a huge problem of doing, and we see the full support from the government.
Very good. Thank you for that. If I just might move on to Ken now, and just sort of ask a slightly different kind of question, not directly related to the COVID crisis. I was just wondering about your exploration focus in Kazakhstan. Obviously, we know you've been looking for copper quite widely, but what about other metals? Is this trend towards battery metals, and perhaps we're seeing some trends in the market about electric vehicles picking up more? Is that influencing what you're going to be targeting? Are you going to be targeting other minerals aside from copper, or is copper really your focus in terms of an energy metal, as it were?
Thanks, Mike. Look, I think your final point actually answers a lot of the question. So we've been debating this matter for some time now, and clearly our decision has been that the copper fundamentally is the largest element of the whole electric vehicle transition. And so it is the primary metal to play if you believe that there's going to be a fundamental change of the global economy towards a much more electrified industry. That being said, we've always maintained a somewhat commodity agnostic view, provided the commodity has sufficient scale to be meaningful in the nature of a Rio Tinto size business. And so the world of battery metals is certainly on our radar. We have for a long time had the developing project in the lithium space, but equally some of the other base metals that are fundamental to the whole battery metals area are also metals that we would be interested in, and we continue to review opportunities in that space. Fundamentally, from an exploration perspective, though, copper remains our bread and butter and our primary focus, not only in Kazakhstan, but from a global perspective.
Thank you for that. I see there's a question in the chat from the audience about, there's a question which says, do we think that COVID-19 will drive a change towards remote operations with minimal site manning, enabled by digital technology, as is going on in some oil and gas operations? So I think I'll direct that question to Nigel, being in the operations space. I mean, do you see that something that is going to be happening with your operations?
It's a good question. It's a question that's probably prevalent, and not just with COVID-19, Mike, I don't think, but prior to that it was happening. And I think it depends on a number of factors. One is scale of the operations, and you maybe find people like Ken's organisation, Rio, certain operations, certain mines, yes, that's already happening now, and it may be accelerated in the future. I think as far as we're concerned, as a small operator, there's a number of considerations. One, where we can introduce automation and technology, we are doing. Certainly at Sasa we've done that. If you were to walk around our SXEW plant, I wouldn't say it's fully automated, but it's very few people managing it. And yet really the in situ leaching, it will be hard to introduce technology to really reduce the manpower. So that's one thing. So where we can, definitely. In terms of remote working from a management perspective, we found during this period, something like this platform, Zoom platform's been a tremendous benefit. I mean, without it, it would have been far more difficult, be it the UK staff, the way we work in the London office, but also the London office communicating with the sites. And, you know, we employ very few expats in our operations, as I think you know, Mike. Certainly we've got one, or only historically had one in Kazakhstan, and, you know, on the fingers of two hands in Macedonia. So we're very light on what you call expats and people being flown in and flown out of the operation. So that we haven't had a negative impact from that. And what has been interesting is seeing how well the site management teams have managed the site. So where we can introduce it, definitely. Zoom technology for remote working and less business travel overseas. I think there will be an influence of that over the coming years, as I think people have now got confidence in this as a platform. Whereas I know certainly from our perspective, we do these kind of exco meetings with site once a month, and we've had platforms which aren't Zoom previously where it's just not worked at all, really. The video's been poor, audio's been poor, then there's a translation issue, and it's a waste of time. But I think with this, you can have a very efficient and effective, meeting effectively. And I think the last thing to say really is the issue of sustainability. And certainly where we work, in terms of supporting communities, we're very conscious and sensitive to the fact we employ people, in jobs there. So it comes back again to the cost-benefit analysis, where you introduce technology and take 50 people out of the equation. You may give yourself a problem because those 50 people are from the local community, and therefore you've got to take that into consideration. It's a very sensitive issue, and it's certainly something we're conscious of all the time. But I don't think, in short answer to the question, it'll have a massive effect on our operations, just because of the scale, nature nature of the ore body, lots of considerations. You couldn't introduce technology on the scale that you get the benefits from it. But it's, you know, naturally businesses are looking at it across the patch in digitization. And I think COVID-19 in lots of factors of the way we all work and live together has accelerated a lot of things that may have taken 10, 20 years to happen are going to happen in maybe 5 years time or whatever. You know, I think it's accelerated.
Absolutely.
A lot of these things.
We've not been given any choice, have we? We've had to adapt, and that's certainly something, and from my perspective, we've seen. And I think some of the other gold producers that we work with in Kazakhstan, like Altan Elmas, for example, they were going down the digital route anyway, but they've had to sort of accelerate some of those programs, and it helps. One of the issues they've had is rotating people that I know, so that they've had to keep people longer on site, and that drives the planning being undertaken remotely. Let's have a look at my other questions. There was one more about, one of the things that we've seen with the COVID-19 crisis is governments around the world have been announcing these stimulus programs, some of them quite substantial. And I'll direct this question at Nariman about obviously, Tainton Samruk has an expectation of what metal prices might be in the future, and that guides some of the areas of your investment. Has the stimulus programs and the impact that's likely to have on some of the demand for commodities influence your decision making in any way?
Mike, thank you for your question. I think that obviously, we have some metals that is priority for us. I think that everyone is doing the same thing. It's copper and gold. And what about the government actions for stimulating the demand for that? So you know that all the gold is purchased by the National Bank, and they announced that for the following 2 years they will be continuing this practice. So that means that they will be purchasing all the gold that is produced within the Kazakhstan, and there will be no export. And we, as the owners of the gold refinery plant that produce 40% of all the gold in Kazakhstan, we are very glad that we don't have any issues with the supply. But the other thing I would like to mention, other issues with the government stimulation. I think the geological search is the key point here. You know that we applied the new program for geological search in Kazakhstan, and we are paying a lot of attention on that, especially from the government side. So as we don't have any big commercial discoveries for the last 25 years, there was no T1 or T2 deposits found in Kazakhstan, and I think that that is the main work that our government is trying, is to stimulate the geological research and to bring the companies here to Kazakhstan to start this works. And everyone is see the potential of Kazakhstan, but the results not very good for the last 25 years. Maybe Ken will give some more information and say that there will be some good news from their side that they're doing, but for now it's not.
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, Ken, what do you think the government's doing enough to provide geodata in the format that is conducive for encouraging exploration in the country?
Look, it's an enormous challenge. We know that having vast archives of hard copy information and transferring that into a digital format that is actually searchable and people can access what they need is an enormous challenge. We've faced that internally, and it's been difficult for us to organize our own internal data. So I do not want to underestimate the work that would be required to convert multiple decades of government's collected information into a readily accessible online format. I think the first important step that's been taken and very much appreciated is that through the new mining code, the ability of companies, ourselves and others, local and international, to access hard copy records out of the various digital or state archives to evaluate the potential exploration potential of ground before applying for licenses is a significant step in the right direction. And the next important step is to progressively move that more and more online, so that people can access it without having to make that physical visit to the different archives. So the intent is there, but it's going to be a long journey, and the important step in that is to make sure that as information is transferred into digital format, that there's an incentive for that to flow back as digital documentation into the archives so that others can access it as well. And certainly that's an area that we'd be only too happy to talk with the regulators, with government, around how to make that happen, using our experience with regards to our own internal collections, but also the engagements we have with government surveys around the world.
Very good, thank you. We've just got another question from the audience where someone's asked about virtual site tours, about presumably, well, it must be referring to mining projects or exploration projects, and about why haven't companies got more virtual tours available, and do you think that stakeholders would like to see more of what's going on at the sites? I mean, I know some of our clients, Alton Almas, for example, has got some very stunning drone photography of some of their sites that you'll find on social media from some of their staff, and you can certainly see what's going on at those operations and see the scale of them. But I mean, there's probably some operations in Kazakhstan who would prefer you not to see their operations from that kind of detail. But I just wondered if anyone on the panel, if Nigel, if you have any of that kind of virtual tours available of your operations to show people what's going on?
Well, we don't at the moment, but funnily enough, it is something we are looking at quite closely. And in the past, we have done some of the drone footage that you mentioned, Mike. Our general director's got his own drone. So it's a little bit amateurish in many ways, to be honest. Not bad, though. I mean, the quality you get just off an iPhone is amazing, really. So we've done drone footage of the dumps in Kazakhstan, for example, and we've done the same at Macedonia. But I think where it's really effective, and I take the point completely, and as I say, we are looking into it, is where you do a combination of kind of drone footage and then some kind of diagrams that explain the process better. Because a picture paints 1,000 words, and an investor can far easier get the understanding of what you do and where the risks are, and you can explain it to somebody a lot easier if you've got that. So we are looking into it. So it's something which I think will accelerate, really. Yeah.
I mean, one of the tools that we've been working on with my colleagues in SRK in Vancouver, they showed me recently, is a tool that they've developed, and it was based from a tablet mapping system, geological mapping system, whereby you can take a picture of an open pit, for example, with a drone down to, it has to be 1 centimeter accuracy. And then using this application, you can share it on screen, and you can maybe have someone in the mine site in Kazakhstan, someone maybe in our office here in Almaty, and someone with SRK in Vancouver, and the three of them can share the screen and they can do mapping online using that tool, using the drone photography. So they're using the virtual tour to not just have a look around, but to do technical work that otherwise would have required a visit to the site and maybe standing on the bench in an open pit that's not particularly safe to do, or could be freezing cold or uncomfortable. And if you're trying to get there from Vancouver, it's sort of 2 days of travel time each way plus some jet lag. So I certainly think the virtual tour is not just something that is going to be a tool for maybe showing stakeholders what's going on, but something we can actually do work, and certainly COVID is driving that. I
think some of the big equipment suppliers already do that on remote maintenance from facilities that are away, many miles away. Really, they can remotely maintain some of the underground equipment.
Ken's nodding there. I'm sure actually there's a Rio Tinto perspective that's quite ahead of what we've been doing in SRK. I know the operations in Western Australia have been pioneering that approach, haven't they?
Yes, indeed. We know this technology is going to change the way we do business. It's been remarkable how everybody has adapted over a space of 3 or 4 months to this current circumstance. And it will be interesting to see how much of that change sticks. Absolutely.
Right, okay, well, I'm being prompted that we've run out of time. So I'm going to thank everyone for attending the webinar. I think it's been very interesting to hear all your points of view and answer the questions. And I'll hand back to David for some closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, Mike. Yes, it's time to acknowledge everybody's contribution here, with Ben from PRISM giving an excellent overview to kick us off. Mike doing very, very good moderating with his panel. Nariman, Nigel, and Ken So thank you all for your excellent contributions. I have to mention Ros and the DIT, without which we wouldn't all be here today, as great support. So that is appreciated. And we also need to acknowledge Samruk as being a major sponsor of the BKS. Just to end here, I'll just very briefly mention that please do look at our website. We have quite a number of events either firmed up or planned for later on this year. After today, I'd say perhaps we should have another mining one, because it's been such a lively session here. But we have 2 oil and gas and renewables later on in the year, one for September and one on renewables planned for November. And we have an agro-business event planned perhaps for next month. These specific ones are in addition to our broader political, diplomatic, cultural events. So look at our website and see what interests you, and we hope you'll also join the BKS in addition. So thank you all. Great.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. See you again soon. Bye-bye.